I'm attorney Martin Nicholson with the Law Office of Martin Nicholson, also known as the Battery Man for my focus on criminal battery cases. I'm going to talk about public defender versus private attorney. This is my honest take on that. When you're facing criminal charges, the first big decision isn't about your case, it's about who will stand beside you in court. The choice often boils down to a public defender versus a private attorney, and it's a classic tug of war between resources and cost. A public defender is a court-appointed lawyer provided for free to individuals who can't afford to hire their own legal counsel. On the other hand, a private attorney is hired directly by you, the defendant. Your decision will ultimately hinge on your financial situation, the complexity of your case, and the level of personal attention you need. Now, I've been a full-time public defender, and also I'm a private attorney now. I do have a contract as a part-time public defender, so I believe I'm qualified to talk about these differences. Now, understanding the core differences. Choosing the legal representation is one of the most critical moves you'll make after being charged with a crime. It's true that both public defenders and private attorneys are licensed professionals. Both of them went to law school, sworn to provide a competent defense, but the realities of the work environments can create very different experiences for their client. The fundamental difference is a simple one. One is a government service and the other is a private one. This distinction shapes everything. It impacts the attorney's caseload, their ability to speak with you, and the resources they can bring to the fight. A private attorney controls their own workload, which can provide for a deeper focus on a smaller number of cases. Public defenders don't have the ability to control their own workload in a sense because they have to take all the clients that come their way, where the private attorney can decline to take some cases. Now, to get a clearer picture, it helps to see the primary distinctions side by side. For a public defender, talking about cost. Public defender, free for people that are eligible. Private attorney, paid directly by the client, and the fees will vary. The selection. Public defenders are usually going to be assigned by the court or the public defender agency. Private attorney are chosen and hired by the client. Caseload. Public defenders' caseloads can be very high, and private attorneys can be lower compared to private attorney. Now, there are standards that are put in place for public defenders that are in what are called commission counties, which I won't go into all that detail about what a commission county is, that limit the number of cases they're supposed to take. Availability. Public defender can be harder to get in contact with sometimes because if they're working their regular work hours, then they may say, hey, we're not working today because it's a holiday or the office is closed and things like that, where a private attorney can kind of set their own hours. If they want to work weekends or holidays, they can, or they can say no. So availability could be limited to the government holidays versus a private attorney who can, basically work whenever they want to and be more flexible. Resources. The resources are going to rely on government-funded resources if you're a public defender as your attorney. And private attorney, they can hire private investigators and experts. But remember, you have to pay. That's not really a one's better than the other. It's if you don't have the resources to hire a private investigator or an expert and you have a private attorney, you may be limited in what you can do. If you have a public defender, then you may be able to get the private investigator because the office may have their own private investigator. They may have the ability, access to get experts where you wouldn't have that if you don't have the money to do it. That's really a big difference because sometimes people think if you have a private attorney, you get to do whatever you want to, but that may not be the case if you don't have the money to have the private attorney hire the private investigator or the experts. Specialization. With public defenders, they're going to have a broad experience in criminal courts because they're taking all these different cases that come through the court that they're assigned to. Private attorney, sometimes private attorneys can specialize in a certain area. They can make their primary focus in DUI cases, primary focus in domestic battery cases, primary focus in murder cases. So they could have a lot of different attorneys, can have a lot of different focus areas that they are specializing in. And they can say, hey, we don't do major felony cases, or they can only do major felony cases, where you may not get that experience with the public defender because they're going to do all kind of cases because they're a full-time public defender. Client control, once again, I was kind of going back to the selection of the public defender versus a private attorney. With client control, if you're a public defender, you may not have as much client control because it may be a situation where the attorney can't fire the client because of the public defender, and the client can't fire the attorney. Where private attorney, the attorney can say, I'm not taking your case, or two, the client can fire the attorney, or the attorney can fire the client. I would say the most significant practical difference is not the lawyer's skill, but the system they work within. A public defender might be a brilliant attorney, but they can't necessarily have the particular client that they want when there is kind of a breakdown in that relationship, and they're taking a case that they may not necessarily be all that passionate about, or the client doesn't like. Where the private attorney can sometimes say, hey, I'm not taking this case, so it makes it easier for them to get a kind of case that fits their practice area a little bit better. Understanding some of these foundational differences is crucial. If you're facing a straightforward misdemeanor charge with limited financial means, the public defender's deep experience with the local court system can be a huge advantage. They know the players and the process in and out. Same thing for a complex felony case. If you have a public defender and you don't have the ability to hire a private attorney, then go with the public defender. They're going to, once again, know the court system, know the players inside and out, and they should have the funds to be able to hire the investigators, expert witnesses, where if you don't have the money to do that, then you're going to have a private attorney that you're giving the money to, but you don't have the money to do the private investigator or expert witnesses. So the decision here is less about which lawyer is better, because this is not what this is. It's more about which type of legal services aligns with your specific need and your financial resources, really. If you have the ability to hire a private attorney, I suggest you do so. If you don't, go with the public defender. Now, analyzing case outcomes and basically some sentencing data. When you're choosing between a public defender and a private attorney, it's easy to assume that paying more guarantees a better result. That's just not the case. While caseloads and resources definitely matter, the actual data on case outcomes paints a much more complicated picture, one that challenges a lot of common myths about conviction rates and sentencing. It's a pervasive myth that public defenders are less effective simply because they're state funded. They are called public pretenders, and TV shows are always, kind of highlighted as buffoons and just not really knowing what time it is, when actually most public defenders are going to know what time it is because they're in court every single day. Look, in reality, their daily immersion in the criminal court system gives them a unique and powerful advantage. They often build solid working relationship with prosecutors and judges, and they develop an intimate understanding of how specific cases typically play out in that courtroom. And that kind of experience and knowledge can be invaluable. A public defender who handles dozens of DUI cases a month might have a deeper insight into local defense strategies than a private attorney who only sees a few each year. One of the most revealing statistics is how similar conviction rates are between public defenders and private lawyers. Research consistently shows that there isn't a significant gap in the likelihood of being found guilty, regardless of whether you have a public defender or a private attorney. The key takeaway from the data is this: the quality of legal defense is not determined by the price tag. An attorney's effectiveness is a product of their experience, familiarity with the court system, and ability to dedicate focused efforts to your case. This isn't to say that private attorneys are less effective or public defenders are less effective. Rather, it just dismantles the myth that private attorneys are always better than a public defender. A generalist private attorney with limited criminal law experience may struggle to achieve the same result as a public defender who lives and breathes that specific area of law every single day. The best outcomes are secured by the lawyer whose skills and experience are best matched to the specifics of the case, not by the one who charges the highest fee. Ultimately, the data encourage a more thoughtful evaluation, urging defendants to look beyond cost and consider the practical advantage each type of counsel brings to the table. When you're facing criminal charges, one of the first questions that come up in the public defender versus private attorney debate is a practical one. Can you even get a public defender? While the Sixth Amendment guarantees your right to an attorney, it doesn't automatically mean you get one for free. In Indiana, that right is reserved for those the court deems indigent, meaning you don't have the financial resources to hire your own lawyer. The whole process kicks off at your very first court date, which is called the initial hearing. The judge will read the charge against you and let you know you have the right to a lawyer. If you can't afford one, you have to speak up and formally ask the court to appoint one for you. This isn't as simple as just raising your hand. You'll be handed a detailed financial sheet. In some cases, sometimes it's just the court asking you some questions, and if you answer the questions correctly, the court says you're indigent. But you are under oath, so make sure you're telling the truth. Indiana courts just don't look at one thing to decide if you qualify. They do try to dig into a financial picture. Some courts and counties more thoroughly than others, right? So they're going to look at income, assets, expenses, dependents. Those are some of the things that, the court will look at. It is a myth that just being unemployed automatically gets you a public defender. If you have a hefty savings account, value of property, or a spouse who earns a good living, the judge might decide you have the means to hire a private attorney, even if you aren't currently working. On the flip side, just because you are working doesn't mean you can't be, just because you are working doesn't mean you can't get a public defender. So the court's decision on indigency should be based on a holistic view of your financial ability. They are assessing whether hiring private counsel would create a substantial hardship for you and your family, preventing you from paying for your basic necessities. So when to choose a public defender or private attorney? It's pretty simple and straightforward. If you can afford an attorney, hire a private attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, then you go with a public defender. That's basically it. Now, here's some frequently asked questions. Can I choose my public defender? The answer is usually no. If the court finds you eligible for a public defender, one will be assigned to you from the local office. This assignment is based entirely on their internal system, things like current caseloads and availability. You usually don't get a say in the matter. This process guarantees that everyone who qualifies gets a lawyer, but it completely removes the element of choice you have when you hire a private attorney. Are public defenders real lawyers? Yes, absolutely. Public defenders are fully licensed attorneys who have gone to law school and passed the Indiana bar exam, just like every private lawyer in the state. Many have dedicated their entire careers to criminal defense and have seen thousands of cases come through their courts. They're held to the exact same professional and ethical standards as any other attorney. The idea that public defenders are somehow lesser lawyers is a dangerous and despicable myth. They are often some of the most battle-tested trial attorneys in the courtroom, sharpening their skills on a daily basis. And a lot of good attorneys that are private started off as public defenders, and I'm one of them. What if I don't qualify for a public defender but can't afford a private attorney? This is a tough spot to be in, and frankly, it happens all the time. Your income might just be a little too high to meet the strict indigency threshold for a public defender, but not nearly enough to comfortably pay a private attorney's retainer. If you find yourself in this gap, you still have options. Payment plans. Most private defense firms are willing to work with you. They offer flexible payment plans or accept credit cards to make their service more manageable. Legal financing. There are companies that specialize in providing loans specifically for legal fees. Free consultations. Take advantage of free initial consultations. This is a good chance to discuss your case with a private attorney and see if you can work out a fee structure that fits your budget. Whatever you do, don't make the mistake of trying to represent yourself. Do not do that. The risk is just too high. Another question, can I switch from a public defender to a private attorney? Yes, you can hire a private attorney at any stage of your case for the most part, even if you've already been working with a public defender. The switch normally is pretty seamless. Once you hire your new lawyer, they'll file a document called a notice of appearance with the court. This officially puts the court on notice that they are now representing you. Your public defender will then file a motion to withdraw, and they'll hand over the file to your new attorney. My final piece of advice, if you have the money to hire a private attorney, do so. Save the public defenders for the people that do not have the means or ability to hire their own counsel. And that's your Nicholson Nugget of the day. Please be sure to like and subscribe.